In the year 2147, humanity had reached the farthest corners of the galaxy, a place where the stars seemed brighter but lonelier, and where every speck of dust in space could hide both wonder and danger. Among these bold explorers was Lieutenant Mara Kessler, a woman who had spent most of her life dreaming of the stars. She wasn't born to adventure. Not really. Her family had lived on Earth for generations, in the crowded cities filled with noise and neon lights, but Mara had always felt a pull toward the unknown, a calling that the streets and skyscrapers of Earth could never satisfy. As a child, she would spend hours staring at the night sky, imagining what lay beyond the familiar constellations. What she didn't know then was that her fascination would lead her to a life that balanced precariously between danger and discovery, one that would push humanity to the edge of survival. Mara's current post, the mining outpost Veganine, was located in a distant star system far from any major human colony. It was a place few people had ever visited, and fewer still wanted to stay for long. The station itself was a marvel of human engineering, a cluster of modules connected by narrow tunnels, orbiting a lifeless gray rock that had been deemed suitable for extraction of rare minerals. The outpost had everything the crew needed to survive: oxygen recyclers, hydroponic gardens, communication arrays, and defense systems. But it lacked the one thing that most people take for granted. The isolation weighed heavily on every person stationed there. Weeks would pass without messages from Earth, and even when they did arrive, the transmissions were delayed by hours, sometimes days. Mara and her team had learned to live with this loneliness, finding comfort in routines, protocols, and small traditions they created to remind themselves they were still human. Mara herself had been at Veganine for nearly 2 years, longer than anyone else on the crew. She had arrived when the station was still in its early stages, a skeleton crew of engineers, scientists, and security personnel, trying to turn a barren rock into a functional outpost. She remembered her first day vividly: the metallic smell of recycled air, the constant hum of the generators, the view of endless stars that seemed close enough to touch. It was awe-inspiring at first, but that awe quickly gave way to the reality of survival in space. The station had a rhythm all its own, dictated by the mining schedules, the maintenance cycles, and the occasional emergency drills. Mara had learned to navigate this rhythm, becoming a leader not through authority alone, but through her ability to keep calm when systems failed and equipment malfunctioned. Life on Veganine was harsh. The planet below was no more than a gray wasteland, with jagged rocks and deep canyons that offered nothing but danger. The atmosphere was toxic, requiring the crew to stay in pressurized suits whenever they ventured outside. Storms of fine metallic dust would sweep across the surface, reducing visibility to zero and damaging delicate machinery. Even simple tasks like repairing a solar panel or inspecting a drill site could turn into life-threatening events if the wind shifted unexpectedly or if a piece of equipment malfunctioned. Mara had witnessed accidents, small and large, and each had left a mark on the crew's psyche. Yet despite the constant threat of danger, there was a strange beauty to life on the edge of known space. The stars were so close that they seemed to shine with a tangible presence, and the silence absolute and unbroken gave the mind space to think in ways impossible on crowded Earth. Mara's crew was a diverse group of people, each with their own reasons for being there. There was Lieutenant Arik Voss, her second-in-command, who had joined the program for the thrill of discovery, but struggled with homesickness and a tendency to act impulsively. Dr. Liana Greer, the station's medical officer, who had left a thriving practice on Earth to study the effects of long-term space habitation on the human body. Engineer Kian Riker, a quiet man whose skills with machinery were unmatched but whose past was shrouded in mystery. Together, they formed a small family, bound not by blood but by necessity and shared experience. Mara often reflected on the strange ways people adapt to isolation, how camaraderie and routine could replace the warmth of home, at least temporarily. Despite the challenges, Mara found a sense of purpose in her work. The minerals extracted from Veganine were rare and valuable, critical for sustaining the growing network of colonies and the advanced technologies humanity had begun to depend on. Every day she reminded herself that the tedious tasks, the constant monitoring of machinery, and the careful planning of supply runs were not just about survival, they were part of humanity's larger journey into the stars. It was a weighty responsibility, and Mara took it seriously, understanding that a single mistake could jeopardize the mission and cost lives. But beyond the daily routines and responsibilities, there was a lingering sense that Veganine was not entirely alone in the galaxy. Mara had always felt it, a subtle undercurrent of something watching from the void. At first it was easy to dismiss equipment glitches, minor sensor anomalies, or the human tendency to imagine patterns in randomness. Yet the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing month. She would catch fleeting blips on the radar that seemed almost deliberate, see shadows moving just beyond the limits of their scanners, and hear strange frequencies that didn't correspond to any known source. She mentioned these to her crew, but most dismissed them as side effects of isolation or minor technical malfunctions. Still, Mara couldn't shake the thought that something or someone was observing them, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The history of human-alien interaction, limited as it was, added a layer of tension to life on Viganine. By 2147, humanity had made contact with several extraterrestrial species, though most encounters had been at a distance and often fraught with misunderstanding. Some civilizations had been friendly, offering trade and knowledge, while others had been hostile, resulting in skirmishes that reminded humanity of its vulnerability. Mara knew that even a minor misstep could have catastrophic consequences. Every signal sent, every probe deployed, and every decision about exploration carried the potential for diplomacy or disaster. It was a delicate balance, one that required intelligence, caution, and sometimes sheer luck. Mara's own training had prepared her for these uncertainties. She had undergone extensive simulations and field exercises designed to test not only her technical skills but also her judgment under pressure. She had studied alien languages, communication protocols, and conflict resolution strategies, understanding that first contact could occur at any moment, often in circumstances that no one could predict. She had been taught to expect the unexpected, to trust her instincts, and to remain calm when facing the unknown. These lessons were more than theoretical. On Viganine, they were a daily necessity. The crew's social life was limited but meaningful. Meals were shared in the central module, where laughter and conversation became a form of resistance against isolation. Holographic displays allowed them to maintain a connection with friends and family back on Earth. Though the delays in communication made conversations feel fragmented and distant, they celebrated birthdays, mission anniversaries, and the occasional minor discovery with small ceremonies that brought comfort and normalcy to an otherwise harsh existence. Mara often observed these moments with a mixture of gratitude and melancholy, knowing that the bonds formed here were temporary, fragile, yet essential for survival. As weeks turned into months, Mara grew increasingly attuned to the subtle rhythms of the station and the surrounding environment. She could sense changes in the asteroid belt, anticipate fluctuations in energy readings, and predict minor mechanical failures before they occurred. This attentiveness made her an indispensable leader, someone who could maintain order and efficiency even in the most challenging circumstances. Yet for all her skill and vigilance, she remained aware of the vast unknown that stretched beyond the station's defenses. The universe was immense, unpredictable, and often indifferent to human concerns. Every day on Viganine was a reminder of humanity's smallness and resilience, a lesson in both humility and determination. One evening, as Mara stood in the observation deck watching a nebula glow faintly in the distance, she reflected on how far humanity had come. The outpost represented more than a mining operation. It was a symbol of exploration, ambition, and the willingness to confront the unknown. She thought about the pioneers who had charted the first interstellar routes, the scientists who had developed life support systems, and the countless others whose work made survival in such hostile conditions possible. Mara felt a profound sense of connection to these efforts, recognizing that her own role, though small in the grand scheme, contributed to the ongoing story of human expansion into the stars. Yet even in these moments of contemplation, there was a tension that Mara could not ignore. The feeling of being watched, of something lurking beyond the senses, persisted. It was as if the universe itself were aware of Viganine and its crew, observing their every action. Mara could not explain it, nor did she know whether it was real or a product of isolation and fatigue. But deep down, she sensed that this unease was not to be dismissed lightly. Something was out there, and when it revealed itself, the consequences would reach far beyond the confines of their small outpost. This combination of isolation, responsibility, wonder, and subtle unease defined life on Viganine. It shaped Mara's decisions, her relationships with the crew, and her understanding of what it meant to exist on the edge of human knowledge. She had learned to embrace both the beauty and the danger of the cosmos, recognizing that survival required more than technical skill. It required vigilance, empathy, and courage. As she prepared for another routine day of monitoring and maintenance, Mara felt a quiet determination. Whatever lay beyond the stars, she would face it with clarity, resolve, and the full awareness that humanity's place in the universe was both precarious and extraordinary. And so, life continued on Viganine, a fragile bubble of human endeavor in an indifferent galaxy. Routine and vigilance intertwined, forming the backdrop against which extraordinary events would soon unfold. Mara could not yet imagine the challenges ahead, the choices that would test her leadership, or the beings that would cross their path. But in this moment, standing amidst the humming machinery and the silent stars, she embodied humanity's enduring spirit, curious, resilient, and unafraid to confront the unknown. Even when it watched back, life on Viganine had settled into a rhythm that the crew had grown used to, though no one could call it easy. Every day brought its own challenges, from monitoring mining equipment to maintaining the delicate life support systems that allowed them to survive on the barren rock below. For Lieutenant Mara Kessler, these routines were familiar territory. She woke before dawn each day, not because the sun rose on Viganine, it did not, but because the station's systems required constant oversight. She would walk the narrow corridors of the outpost, checking monitors, inspecting machinery, and ensuring that every crew member was accounted for. The hum of energy conduits and the soft mechanical whir of automated drones had become as natural to her as breathing. This routine, while monotonous at times, had the comforting rhythm of predictability, and Mara often relied on it to steady her thoughts in a place that was otherwise vast, silent, and unpredictable. The crew had developed small rituals to maintain morale and sanity. They shared meals together in the communal module, where holographic displays projected images of Earth's cities, forests, and oceans, reminders of a world they could not visit. Conversations flowed about familiar topics, from personal stories of home to debates about the next supply rotation. Mara enjoyed these moments, though she sometimes felt a pang of nostalgia for the life she had left behind. It was in these small, human interactions that the crew found connection and a sense of purpose, even as they faced isolation millions of miles from any other human settlement. Routine, however, was not always reliable in the vast emptiness of space. One morning, the station's sensors picked up something unusual in the nearby asteroid field, a flicker of energy that did not match the typical background signals they were used to monitoring. At first it seemed insignificant, barely registering on the monitors. Mara leaned over the console, squinting at the readings. The signals were irregular, unlike the predictable signatures of mining drones or passing meteorites. They appeared as bursts of light and energy that did not correspond to anything in Veganine's database. Mara felt a faint thrill of curiosity. Space, she knew, was full of surprises, and every anomaly represented a story waiting to be discovered. She called over Arik Voss, her second-in-command, who shared her concern but approached the matter with caution. The anomaly led the crew into a careful investigation. They reviewed historical data from the station, tracing back weeks of sensor readings to determine if this was a new phenomenon or something that had been overlooked. What they found was fascinating. The energy bursts had been increasing in intensity and frequency over the past few days, forming a pattern that hinted at deliberate origin. Mara's mind raced with possibilities. Could it be a natural phenomenon, like a localized energy storm? Or was it evidence of something or someone intentionally signaling them? These questions weighed heavily on her. She was trained to approach the unknown methodically, balancing curiosity with caution. Yet a part of her felt a surge of excitement at the thought of first contact with an alien intelligence. The decision to investigate further was not made lightly. The asteroid field surrounding Veganine was a dangerous place. Massive chunks of rock floated unpredictably, and mining equipment had to navigate these obstacles carefully. The station's scanners were precise but not infallible. A collision with an unnoticed fragment could damage vital systems and endanger the crew's lives. Despite these risks, Mara and her team prepared an expedition. Suits were checked and recalibrated, drones were deployed to map the asteroid terrain, and communication protocols were reviewed. Every detail mattered because even a minor oversight could escalate into disaster. The tension in the station was palpable as the crew worked together, balancing fear with determination. When the drones approached the source of the anomaly, the crew received the first clear indication of its origin. Nestled among the jagged rocks was a small probe unlike anything the human crew had ever seen. Its surface was smooth, metallic, and intricately patterned with symbols that defied recognition. It pulsed faintly with an inner light, as if it were alive in some sense that humans could not comprehend. The probe emitted a series of signals that resonated across the station's communication arrays. Mara stared at the console, heart pounding. This was no ordinary object. The probe's pattern suggested intelligence, intentional design, and perhaps even a plea for help. Deciphering the probe proved to be a monumental task. The symbols and frequencies did not match any human language or code. Attempts to communicate using standard protocols yielded no response. Mara called upon Leanna Greer, the station's medical officer, who had a background in pattern recognition and analysis, and Kian Riker, whose technical skills with machinery and computing were unmatched. Together, the team worked tirelessly, analyzing every pulse, every flicker of light, and every pattern in the signals. They theorized, tested hypotheses, and slowly began to piece together fragments of meaning. The probe, they realized, was attempting to communicate a message of distress, though the details were frustratingly vague. It was as if the alien intelligence had sent a signal across unimaginable distances, hoping that someone, somewhere, would understand. The implications of this discovery were staggering. Vega 29, isolated and far from Earth, had just become the first human outpost to receive a potential SOS from an alien civilization. Mara understood the magnitude of the moment. If they could interpret the message correctly, humanity could establish its first meaningful contact with an intelligent extraterrestrial species. The excitement was tempered by fear. Miscommunication, mishandling, or misinterpretation could provoke unintended consequences. Humanity's first contact could lead to friendship, trade, and knowledge, or to hostility, destruction, and regret. Mara felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon her, knowing that every decision she made would have far-reaching consequences. As the crew debated the next steps, tensions naturally arose. Arik, ever cautious, argued that they should quarantine the probe, study it further, and avoid sending any responses until they were certain it was safe. He feared that any hasty action could trigger aggression or contamination. Mara, on the other hand, recognized the moral and practical imperative to respond. An SOS, after all, was a call for help, and ignoring it would mean leaving someone or something suffering in the cold depths of space. The discussions were intense but ultimately productive, with the crew weighing the risks against their ethical duty. In the end, Mara's sense of curiosity, courage, and responsibility guided the decision. They would respond carefully and deliberately, with a message that conveyed peaceful intent. Preparing a response was an exercise in ingenuity and collaboration. The crew studied the probe's patterns for clues about syntax and structure, experimenting with combinations of signals that might be understandable. Hours turned into days as they refined their communication methods, testing them with incremental adjustments. The work was exhausting, yet exhilarating. Each successful transmission pulse brought a sense of accomplishment, a small victory in the daunting task of speaking across the stars. The station buzzed with quiet excitement, tempered by an awareness of the unknown dangers that might be awakened by their actions. As the first response was finally sent, Mara felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. They had crafted a simple message, a gesture of recognition, a sign that the distress had been acknowledged, and an offer of assistance. The probe responded almost immediately, sending back a series of intricate pulses that suggested understanding. It was the first tangible sign of success, proof that communication across interstellar distances was possible. The crew watched the monitors with awe, realizing that their actions, modest as they seemed, were a historic moment. Humanity had made contact, and for the first time, the vast emptiness of space seemed alive with the possibility of connection. The excitement, however, was short. Viganin was not prepared for the consequences that would follow. The probe's signals seemed to act as a beacon, not just for the crew, but for whatever intelligence had sent it. Within hours, sensors detected unusual energy fluctuations in the surrounding asteroid field, flickers of light that moved with purpose, almost as if something was approaching. The station's alarms remained silent, but the tension among the crew grew. Mara felt a growing unease that the initial success might have drawn attention they could not yet comprehend. She began to suspect that responding to the SOS was only the first step in a chain of events that would escalate beyond their expectations. During the next few days, the crew maintained heightened vigilance. Every scan, every signal, and every anomaly was scrutinized. The atmosphere in the station shifted subtly from cautious curiosity to a mixture of wonder and apprehension. Mara could sense that the universe was responding to their actions in ways they did not fully understand. The isolation that had once been manageable now felt more pronounced, as if the station was suspended in a vast sentient void that was aware of their presence. Yet despite the fear, Mara remained committed to her duty. She reminded herself and her team that the pursuit of knowledge, even in the face of risk, was at the heart of their mission. The early situation on V, therefore, was a delicate balance of discovery, risk, and anticipation. The crew had taken a bold step into the unknown by investigating the anomalous probe and responding to its SOS. They had experienced the thrill of first contact, the satisfaction of collaboration, and the awe of realizing that the universe was far more intricate and intelligent than they had imagined. At the same time, they were acutely aware of the dangers inherent in their actions. The unknown intelligence could be friendly or hostile. Their response could have unintended consequences, and the vastness of space could amplify every minor miscalculation into disaster. Vega-9 transformed from a routine outpost into a focal point of cosmic significance. Every action, every decision, and every observation carried weight. Mara, as the leader, felt the burden of responsibility keenly. She understood that the decisions made here would ripple across the galaxy, shaping humanity's place in the interstellar community. Yet she also felt a profound sense of purpose, a recognition that their work mattered not just to themselves but to all of humanity. They were explorers at the edge of known space, standing at the threshold of possibilities that stretched beyond imagination. This combination of anticipation, responsibility, and awe defined the early situation on Viganin. It was a period of preparation and discovery, of cautious engagement with the unknown, and of the realization that even the smallest actions could have monumental consequences. As Mara and her crew continued their work, they remained vigilant, curious, and determined, ready to face whatever the universe had in store. It was in this delicate balance that the story of Viganin truly began, setting the stage for challenges, revelations, and encounters that would test the limits of human courage, ingenuity, and resilience. After the first tentative exchanges with the alien probe, life on Viganin began to change in ways no one could have anticipated. At first, the crew tried to maintain their routines, believing that the anomalies were minor and manageable. They continued their mining operations, checked systems, and monitored the outpost as usual. But subtle changes in the environment quickly made it clear that something extraordinary and potentially dangerous was unfolding. The station's sensors started picking up energy fluctuations far beyond anything the crew had previously recorded. At first, these were small, occasional bursts, easy to dismiss as interference or technical glitches. But within days, the fluctuations became more pronounced, appearing in regular patterns and moving in ways that suggested intent. Mara Kessler watched the readings carefully, her sense of unease growing. She had spent years preparing for the unknown, yet this felt different. There was an intelligence behind it, one that was testing the boundaries of Veganine and the humans who inhabited it. The anomalies began subtly. Lights in the station flickered, sometimes for only a second, sometimes for several minutes. Communication signals occasionally distorted, leaving fragments of messages garbled and confusing. Life support systems reported minor fluctuations in oxygen levels that corrected themselves almost immediately. But the crew could not shake the feeling that the station was somehow under observation. Mara instructed her engineers to check all systems thoroughly, convinced that mechanical issues were the most likely cause, yet every test returned normal results. Kian Riker, Veganine's chief engineer, muttered about how the systems were too perfect, as though some external force was interfering with their readings. The tension grew because no one could explain it, and the unknown always carried weight. As the days passed, the anomalies intensified. On several occasions, the station's external cameras picked up strange shadows moving across the asteroid field. At first, the crew assumed these were fragments of rock or mining debris, pushed by gravitational currents. But the movement was too precise, too coordinated, to be random. Mara pored over the footage late at night, her eyes tracing the shapes as they darted with purpose and speed that defied natural laws. It became increasingly clear that whatever was observing Veganine was capable of technology far beyond human understanding. Even Arik Voss, normally cautious and skeptical, admitted that something unusual was happening. The crew began to speak in hushed tones, sharing theories that ranged from intelligent alien life to advanced automated systems sent long ago by an unknown civilization. The sense of wonder that had accompanied the discovery of the probe now mingled with a palpable tension, and no one felt entirely comfortable. One morning, the station received a signal from the probe that was unlike anything before. It was not a simple pulse or pattern. Instead, it seemed almost alive, a cascade of energy waves that moved across multiple frequencies simultaneously. The station's instruments struggled to process the data. Mara called an emergency meeting with the crew, and they spent hours analyzing the transmission, trying to determine whether it contained a warning, a continuation of the SOS, or something else entirely. Neonagria suggested that the probe might be communicating emotions rather than words, an advanced attempt at expressing distress through patterns of energy. Mara found the idea both fascinating and terrifying. The more they deciphered, the more it became apparent that the probe's message was complex, intelligent, and urgent. This urgency soon manifested in a more physical way. Mining drones, which normally operated autonomously in the asteroid field, began reporting interference. Some stopped responding to commands entirely, while others behaved erratically, moving in patterns that mirrored the strange signals from the probe. Mara and Kian attempted to regain control, but every effort seemed to provoke further anomalies. It was as if the probe's signal was extending beyond its physical form, affecting machinery across the outpost. The crew began to realize that their actions, particularly the decision to respond to the SOS, had consequences far beyond what they had imagined. They were not simply observers. They had become participants in a larger event that was unfolding in real time, a situation they barely understood. The psychological impact on the crew was significant. Sleep became difficult for many, as the constant hum of machinery combined with the intermittent energy surges created an almost oppressive atmosphere. Some reported seeing brief apparitions on the monitors, flashes of light resembling spacecraft or objects moving with impossible speed. Others experienced auditory hallucinations, voices, faint whispers, or mechanical sounds that had no identifiable source. Mara worked to keep the crew focused, understanding that panic could be as dangerous as any physical threat in the isolated environment of Veganine. She instituted strict schedules, rotation of duties, and mental health checks, knowing that the survival of the crew depended on both their physical safety and their ability to remain calm under unprecedented stress. Despite the fear, Mara also recognized that these anomalies presented a unique opportunity. Humanity had long speculated about intelligent life beyond Earth, but few had ever come close to direct interaction. Veganine was now at the center of a historic event, one that could redefine human understanding of the universe. Mara balanced her sense of responsibility with cautious curiosity, constantly reminding herself that every decision mattered. If they handled the situation wisely, they could learn more than any mission had ever achieved. If they acted recklessly, the consequences could be catastrophic. The tension between discovery and survival became the defining feature of life on the outpost. During this phase, the situation escalated further, when the crew began to notice anomalies in the gravitational readings around Veganine. Instruments indicated fluctuations that could not be explained by the nearby asteroids or known cosmic phenomena. Objects appeared to shift in the asteroid field as if influenced by an invisible hand, and occasional tremors shook the outpost modules. Mara convened another emergency meeting to discuss possible explanations. Eric suggested that the fluctuations might be caused by a previously undiscovered celestial phenomenon, but Mara was skeptical. She had spent enough time in space to know that unusual cosmic events typically followed predictable patterns. What they were experiencing was something deliberate, directed, and intelligent. The crew's attention shifted from the probe itself to the wider implications of their discovery. They began to question whether the signal they had sent in response to the SOS had acted as a beacon. Had they unwittingly alerted a larger force, one far more advanced than themselves? The possibility weighed heavily on Mara. Every observation seemed to confirm that Veganine was no longer isolated. Something or someone was aware of their presence, and the intentions of this entity remained unknown. The crew prepared for contingencies, emergency shutdown procedures, evacuation protocols, and defense measures. Though they had limited resources, Mara wanted to ensure that they could respond quickly to any threat, real or perceived. One night, while analyzing sensor data, Kian noticed a subtle but alarming pattern. The anomalies were no longer random. They appeared to be converging toward the station itself. Lights pulsed with increasing intensity, energy readings spiked, and drone interference became nearly constant. Mara watched the monitors, her pulse quickening. The sense of being observed had shifted to a sense of being approached. The unknown intelligence was closing in, testing boundaries, or preparing for contact in a way that was impossible to predict. The crew felt a mixture of awe and fear, knowing that the next phase of this encounter could determine the fate of Veganine and possibly all of humanity. Communication attempts with the probe continued, but the responses grew more complex. The signals were layered, multidimensional, and sometimes contradictory. Liana suggested that the intelligence behind the probe might be communicating multiple messages at once. Distress, instructions, and warnings all embedded in a single transmission. Mara realized that interpreting these messages required both technical skill and intuition. The crew worked around the clock, taking shifts to monitor the signals, record data, and refine their understanding. Exhaustion set in, but the drive to comprehend the unknown pushed them forward. Each failure brought renewed caution. The atmosphere aboard Veganine was tense but electric, charged with the potential for discovery and disaster alike. The rising conflict became personal as well. Crew members experienced emotional strain that reflected the physical and psychological challenges of the situation. Arek's impulsive tendencies became more pronounced, leading to heated arguments about the proper course of action. Liana struggled to maintain calm while caring for the crew's mental health, recognizing the subtle signs of stress and fear. Mara herself felt the weight of leadership like never before. Decisions were no longer just about operational efficiency, they were about life and death, about interpreting signals that might hold the key to survival or destruction. She grappled with the enormity of responsibility, balancing the need for action with the imperative to remain cautious. As days turned into weeks, the anomalies around Veganine became increasingly impossible to ignore. The station's sensors recorded objects moving at impossible speeds, energy waves that defied known physics, and patterns that suggested deliberate intelligence. Mara understood that these were not random events but a series of tests or interactions, orchestrated by a civilization far beyond human comprehension. The crew's routines were disrupted constantly, and even simple tasks like repairing a module or monitoring mining equipment required heightened vigilance. Life on Veganine had shifted from predictable monotony to an unpredictable struggle against an invisible, omnipotent presence. Mara's leadership was tested at every turn. She held strategy meetings, delegated responsibilities, and maintained constant communication with Earth. Despite the delays inherent in interstellar transmission, her decisions had to balance immediate safety with the long-term goal of understanding the anomaly. Every choice carried risk: ignore the signals and possibly provoke hostility, respond too aggressively and risk drawing unwanted attention, or delay action and potentially miss a critical opportunity. Mara understood that the rising conflict was not merely external, it was internal as well. A struggle to maintain composure, judgment, and hope in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. The crew's relationship with the probe evolved during this phase. What had initially seemed like a passive SOS became an interactive challenge. The probe's signals now appeared reactive, almost as if it were aware of the humans' attempts to understand it. This interaction created a dynamic tension. The crew wanted to assist, yet each response carried potential danger. Mara reflected on the paradox of exploration. The pursuit of knowledge could bring both enlightenment and peril, and the line between curiosity and recklessness was razor-thin. Veganine had become a crucible of human capability, intellect, and courage, with the rising conflict serving as both test and catalyst for growth. It was clear to Mara that the situation had escalated far beyond initial expectations. Veganine was no longer just a remote mining outpost. It was the focal point of an unfolding cosmic event. The anomalies suggested an approaching intelligence of immense power and sophistication, capable of affecting not just the probe but the very environment of the station. The rising conflict was no longer hypothetical, it was imminent, and the crew had to prepare for the next stage, whatever it might bring. The balance between curiosity, caution, and survival would define their actions in the days ahead. Veganine had become a bridge between humanity and the unknown, a point of contact that could reshape their understanding of life in the galaxy. Mara, her crew, and the outpost itself were on the cusp of history, facing a rising conflict that tested courage, intellect, and resilience. Every sensor reading, every anomaly, and every pulse of the probe's signal was a reminder that they were no longer alone, and that the choices they made in this precarious phase would echo far beyond the cold, silent stars surrounding them. The calm that had briefly returned to Viganin after the initial anomalies was shattered one morning in a way no one on the station could have anticipated. Lieutenant Mara Kessler awoke to a blaring alarm, a sound that instantly raised her heartbeat and filled the corridors with tense energy. Red lights flashed along the module walls, reflecting off the metallic surfaces, casting sharp shadows that made the station feel alive and threatening. Her first thought was a system failure, catastrophic breach, a power overload, or perhaps an accident in the mining operations. But as she quickly accessed the central monitors, her fear transformed into something far more profound. The sensors were reporting objects in orbit around Viganin, objects far larger and more numerous than any human-made craft, and their movements suggested intelligence, coordination, and unprecedented technological power. The crew's initial contact with the alien probe had escalated into a confrontation with a force that dwarfed anything humanity had ever encountered. Meros' pulse quickened as she gathered her team. Arik Voss, ever loyal but now visibly shaken, stood beside her at the central console. Leon Agria had already begun checking the medical systems and the psychological readiness of the crew, understanding that panic could easily turn into tragedy in the confined spaces of the station. Keon Riker, his calm usually unshakable, furrowed his brow as he analyzed the data streaming across the screens. The anomaly was no longer subtle. It was an undeniable presence, a fleet of vessels that defied all known physics, orbiting the station with precision that suggested deliberate intent. Each ship radiated a kind of energy that caused the instruments to fluctuate, making it difficult to maintain accurate readings. The breaking point had arrived. The realization hit Mara like a physical force. Their small outpost, which had once felt like the edge of human exploration, was now surrounded by technology capable of overwhelming and destroying them in moments. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. The knowledge that every decision she made now could determine whether her crew survived. It was not only a matter of strategy but also of human instinct, intuition, and courage. She took a deep breath, attempting to steady herself, knowing that the breaking point was as much psychological as it was physical. The crew needed a leader who could navigate fear, uncertainty, and imminent danger with clarity, and Mara was determined to be that anchor. The fleet remained silent initially, a perfect, ominous presence that seemed to study the outpost as much as the humans inside had studied it. Mara directed the team to scan for communication signals, attempting to determine whether these ships carried intelligence, weapons, or some form of defensive technology. The readings were inconclusive but alarming. Energy spikes were detected at intervals too precise to be natural, and the ship's formation continuously adjusted as if anticipating every movement of Viganin. Arik suggested activating the station's defensive systems, but Mara hesitated. They had limited armaments, mostly for minor mining threats, and any attempt to engage might provoke a catastrophic response. She weighed the risks carefully. Aggressive action could trigger annihilation, while inaction might be interpreted as weakness or submission. Amid this tension, the probe that had initiated contact began transmitting again, this time with a complexity and urgency that could no longer be ignored. Mara and the team gathered around the monitors as a cascade of signals flooded the station's communication arrays. The patterns were faster, denser, and more intricate than anything they had seen before. It was clear that the probe was trying to communicate something crucial: an explanation, instructions, or perhaps a warning about the approaching fleet. Mara's mind raced as she attempted to decode the signals. Time was no longer on their side. The alien presence was closing in, and every moment spent deciphering the message could have consequences. The psychological strain on the crew intensified rapidly. Sleep became impossible, as the constant humming of the station's systems mixed with faint pulses of energy from the fleet created a sense of looming danger. Some crew members began showing signs of acute stress, trembling hands, rapid breathing, and erratic behavior. Mara knew that fear could be as deadly as any physical threat in a confined environment, so she implemented strict shifts, keeping everyone occupied with essential tasks while monitoring mental health. Despite her efforts, anxiety permeated the station. Crew members whispered in hushed tones about the possibility that this fleet could destroy them, erase Viganin, and make humanity realize just how small and fragile it was in the universe. Physical disruptions began to accompany the psychological tension. The station's sensors reported gravity fluctuations, unusual electromagnetic interference, and a series of microquakes in the modules themselves. Machinery that had been reliable for years began malfunctioning in ways that could not be explained by human error. Mining drones went rogue, spinning and twisting in erratic patterns that mirrored the energy pulses from the alien ships. It became painfully clear that the fleet's technology was interacting with the station's environment, either as a demonstration of power or as a method of communication. Every mechanical failure, every alarm, and every flicker of light added to the sense of imminent danger. The breaking point was no longer approaching, it was here. Mara faced her most critical leadership challenge yet: how to respond without triggering annihilation, while still attempting to understand the intentions of the alien fleet. Her training had prepared her for emergencies, but never for this. There were no manuals, no previous encounters, and no precedent for dealing with a civilization capable of planet-scale power. She weighed the options: ignore the fleet and risk provocation, attempt direct communication and risk misinterpretation, or initiate defensive measures and possibly invite destruction. Each option carried immense risk. Mara's instincts told her that caution combined with intelligence was the only path forward. Aggression could be fatal. Hesitation could also be fatal. The margin for error was razor-thin. The decision to attempt direct communication was made collectively, but Mara bore the responsibility for execution. Using the probe as an intermediary, they transmitted a carefully constructed message of peaceful intent. The signals were designed to mirror the complexity of the probe's own transmissions, incorporating energy pulses, frequencies, and patterns, intended to convey understanding, empathy, and non-aggression. As the message was sent, the fleet remained silent, an unyielding presence in orbit. Hours stretched into tense minutes, and every system aboard Veganine was monitored for signs of reaction. The station seemed to hold its breath alongside the humans, waiting for a response that would determine their fate. When the fleet finally responded, the reaction was dramatic. Massive energy pulses emanated from the outermost ships, creating disturbances in Veganine's orbit and forcing the station to initiate emergency stabilization procedures. The crew was thrown into action, working with precision to prevent catastrophic failure of life support systems. Mara watched the readings with a mixture of awe and terror. The fleet had interpreted their message, but the scale of its response was incomprehensible. They were not just intelligent, they were overwhelmingly powerful, capable of manipulating energy and matter on a scale that humans could barely understand. The breaking point was not just about danger, it was a revelation of humanity's fragility and vulnerability in the cosmos. As the fleet's energy waves stabilized, a single smaller vessel detached and approached Veganine. Unlike the massive ships in orbit, this craft moved with grace and precision, as though it had been designed for observation and communication rather than destruction. Mara realized that this was their chance for first contact, the moment where negotiation, understanding, and courage would determine the outcome. She ordered the crew to monitor every pulse, every signal, and every fluctuation with the utmost care. The tension was unbearable, but the opportunity was unprecedented. Humanity had reached the breaking point, but it also stood on the threshold of discovery. The emotional intensity aboard Veganine was overwhelming. Crew members alternated between fear, awe, and a strange exhilaration at witnessing a level of technology and intelligence beyond human comprehension. Arik whispered to Mara about the possibility that they were standing in the presence of a civilization capable of annihilating worlds. Liana quietly reminded everyone to focus on their tasks, understanding that panic could quickly become deadly. Even Kion, normally the most stoic, admitted that he had never imagined encountering technology that could manipulate gravitational fields and energy with such precision. Every heartbeat aboard Veganine echoed the tension of standing on the edge of existence, and Mara felt the weight of her crew's survival in every decision she made. The fleet remained in orbit, its presence constant and undeniable. Every scan revealed energy patterns, structural forms, and movement that suggested an intelligence both alien and extraordinarily advanced. The breaking point was a combination of external threat and internal pressure: the fleet outside, the unknown intentions, and the psychological toll on the humans within. Mara understood that failure to act wisely could result in immediate destruction, but misinterpretation of the signals or hesitation could provoke a reaction that might be equally catastrophic. The burden of leadership had never been heavier. As the day turned to night, or at least the station's artificial cycle of time, Mara reflected on how close they had come to disaster. The events that had unfolded were beyond the realm of ordinary human experience, pushing the crew to confront fear, uncertainty, and the limits of their understanding. The breaking point was not merely a moment of crisis. It was a crucible in which human courage, intellect, and resilience were being tested. Mara felt the enormity of the moment keenly. Veganine had gone from a remote mining outpost to a focal point of interstellar significance, and the consequences of every decision would reverberate far beyond their tiny corner of space. In the hours that followed, the fleet maintained its presence. Observing and testing the limits of Veganine, Mara and her crew continued to analyze the signals, refine their understanding, and prepare for further escalation. The breaking point had been reached, but it also marked the transition from fear to cautious action, from paralysis to engagement. Humanity's first real encounter with an alien civilization capable of world-scale power was underway, and Veganine was the center of it. Every sensor reading, every pulse, and every decision carried immense weight, shaping the outcome of an encounter that would redefine the human understanding of life, intelligence, and survival in the universe. It was clear that nothing would ever be the same. Veganine had been pushed to the brink, but it had not yet fallen. The fleet remained a constant, overwhelming presence, a reminder of both the fragility and resilience of human life. The breaking point was not just a moment of danger, it was a turning point in the story of humanity, a test of courage, intellect, and the ability to navigate the unknown. Mara knew that the days ahead would demand every ounce of skill, wisdom, and courage her crew could muster. The tension on Veganine had reached a level that few humans could imagine. Every crew member moved through the station cautiously, eyes constantly on monitors, ears attuned to every hum, pulse, and vibration. Mara Kessler knew that the decisions made in the next hours would define not only the survival of the crew, but also humanity's first real encounter with an alien civilization capable of unimaginable power. The fleet in orbit was immense, its presence overwhelming, and yet there was a faint hope that reason and communication could prevent disaster. Mara understood that the key lay not in aggression or flight, but in intelligence, patience, and courage. The first step toward resolution came when Mara and her team realized that the smaller vessel that had detached from the main fleet was reacting directly to the probe's signals. Unlike the massive ships that orbited silently, this craft seemed capable of understanding intent. It was as though it were observing Veganine, interpreting their actions, and waiting for a demonstration of cooperation. Mara instructed the team to continue transmitting carefully constructed messages through the probe, using patterns designed to convey clarity, non-aggression, and willingness to cooperate. Every pulse and frequency was meticulously chosen, tested, and refined. Even a minor error could provoke a misunderstanding. The crew worked with precision, aware that they were navigating uncharted territory. Hours turned into an intense stretch of observation, transmission, and monitoring. The alien craft moved closer, its energy fields causing minor disturbances in Veganine's outer modules, but without any aggression. Mara interpreted this as a form of cautious acknowledgement and understanding that humans were attempting to communicate, rather than a threat to be neutralized. The relief among the crew was palpable, but they remained vigilant. They knew that hope could be dangerous if it led to complacency. The breaking point had passed, but the outcome was still uncertain. Every observation, every sensor reading, and every pulse from the probe mattered. Mara decided to initiate a more structured form of communication, using the probe's signals as a base. The crew sent complex sequences of energy patterns intended to express cooperation, empathy, and understanding. These were not words in the human sense, but patterns designed to convey intent across barriers of language, perception, and biology. Liana Greer observed the crew's emotional reactions closely, noting signs of stress or fatigue that could interfere with their ability to transmit accurately. Eric Voss monitored the fleet's responses, watching for changes in formation, energy fluctuations, or other indicators of intent. Keon Riker continuously calibrated the equipment, ensuring that transmissions were stable and precise. It was a delicate dance of science, intuition, and courage. The first real breakthrough came when the smaller vessel reacted with a series of energy pulses that were clearly responsive to the transmissions. Mara watched as the lights on the monitors danced in patterns that suggested recognition and comprehension. The fleet was no longer simply observing, they were engaging. The magnitude of this realization hit the crew with a mixture of awe and relief. Humanity, at the edge of vulnerability, had made contact with a civilization capable of vast power, and more importantly, that civilization was responsive to reason, patience, and intention. It was a profound moment, a validation of Mara's leadership and the crew's perseverance. Despite this progress, the situation remained precarious. The massive ships in orbit still carried the potential for devastation, and their presence served as a constant reminder of the stakes involved. Mara understood that the resolution would not come from a single message or observation. It would require sustained effort, careful calibration, and the consistent demonstration of non-hostile intent. She organized the crew into shifts, ensuring that the station's systems were monitored continuously, that transmissions were maintained without interruption, and that every action was deliberate and controlled. The human element was as crucial as the technical one. Panic or error could undermine the fragile progress they had achieved. As the day continued, the smaller vessel began to display behavior that suggested an offer of guidance or cooperation. Energy waves formed patterns that indicated instructions or warnings, subtle but interpretable by the Veganine crew. Mara and Keon worked to decode these signals, cross-referencing them with the original probe transmissions. Slowly, a picture emerged. The fleet had understood that Veganine's crew was attempting peaceful communication, and the smaller vessel was acting as a liaison to convey information, reduce risk, and ensure understanding. The relief aboard the station was palpable, but Mara remained focused on the work. She knew that survival depended not on relief, but on continued diligence. Over the next several hours, the resolution took shape as a process of interaction and comprehension. The fleet's ships adjusted their orbits slightly, demonstrating that they were responding to human signals in real time. Mara observed the displays, realizing that the alien intelligence was capable of both observation and adaptation, interpreting Veganine's actions and reacting in ways that suggested a high level of cognition. The crew worked tirelessly to maintain transmissions, ensuring that their intent was clear and consistent. They documented every response, every energy pattern, and every fluctuation, understanding that this moment would be of historical importance. In addition to technical efforts, Mara focused on leadership and morale. She held briefings to explain every development, to remind the crew of the purpose of their actions, and to reinforce the importance of calm and clarity. The psychological pressure was immense, and maintaining composure was essential. Crew members rotated between monitoring duties, system maintenance, and rest periods to prevent fatigue from causing errors. Mara's steady presence provided a sense of stability, helping to anchor the crew's nerves even as the extraordinary circumstances unfolded. The smaller vessel's behavior gradually shifted from cautious observation to clear interaction. It began to emit energy patterns that seemed instructional, demonstrating safe operational practices and indicating potential environmental hazards. Mara interpreted this as a sign of trust-building, a recognition that the humans on Viganine were capable of understanding and cooperation. The magnitude of this development cannot be overstated. A civilization of unimaginable technological capability had not only acknowledged humanity but had chosen to interact constructively. For the crew, the fear that had dominated the breaking point phase began to give way to cautious optimism. This transition was not without challenges. Misinterpretation of even a single signal could have provoked a disastrous response. The crew had to balance speed with accuracy, curiosity with caution. Mara guided them through this delicate process, constantly reminding them that patience and clarity were paramount. Every transmission was double-checked, every reading verified, and every potential error considered before action. The crew's cohesion and discipline were tested to the utmost, and their ability to operate as a unit became a critical factor in the unfolding resolution. During this period, Mara also began to consider the broader implications of the encounter. The fleet's sheer size and capability suggested the existence of a civilization far more advanced than humanity. The potential for knowledge, technology, and understanding was immense, but so too was the responsibility. Humanity's first true interstellar contact was a chance for learning, diplomacy, and growth, but it also carried the risk of misunderstanding or exploitation. Mara realized that the resolution of this immediate crisis would shape humanity's approach to future encounters. She made a mental note that documentation and careful analysis were as important as survival itself. As the smaller vessel maintained its interaction, the fleet's larger ships adjusted in subtle ways. They seemed to recognize the patterns of human cooperation, maintaining a presence that was intimidating but non-aggressive. Mara interpreted this as a form of conditional acknowledgement. They were powerful enough to obliterate Viganine but chose not to, signaling that reason and communication were recognized and valued. The crew continued to refine their transmissions, reinforcing the message of peace, cooperation, and mutual respect. It was a delicate negotiation conducted entirely through patterns of energy, a testament to human ingenuity and courage. Gradually, the situation reached a point of stability. The smaller vessel began to disengage, returning to the larger fleet, but not without leaving behind a clear indication that humanity's intentions had been understood. Mara and her team documented every signal, pattern, and reaction, understanding that they were witnessing a historic event. Viganine had survived its encounter with a civilization capable of annihilation, and more importantly, had established communication and a foundation for understanding. The resolution was not final, but it represented a successful navigation of one of the most dangerous and unprecedented events in human history. In the aftermath of the immediate resolution, Mara held a debriefing with her crew. She praised their skill, courage, and cooperation, emphasizing that the outcome had been a product of collective effort and careful action. She also reminded them that the universe remained vast, unpredictable, and filled with unknown challenges. The resolution of this crisis did not mean the end of risk, but it demonstrated humanity's capacity to survive, adapt, and communicate with intelligences far beyond its own. The crew spent the following hours monitoring the fleet as it moved away, ensuring that no residual anomalies threatened the station. Systems that had been affected by energy pulses and environmental disturbances were checked, repaired, and stabilized. Psychological support was offered to all crew members, acknowledging the intense stress and emotional strain they had endured. Liana Greer noted the resilience displayed by the team, a combination of professional skill, personal courage, and trust in leadership. Mara took pride in this, recognizing that the human element had been as critical to the resolution as technical expertise. Viganine had emerged from the brink. The alien fleet had acknowledged their peaceful intent. The smaller vessel had provided guidance and communication, and the immediate threat of destruction had been averted. Mara and her crew had navigated an unprecedented interstellar encounter, demonstrating courage, intelligence, and resilience. They had faced a breaking point that tested every aspect of their abilities and had succeeded in resolving the crisis through skillful action, calm leadership, and careful communication. First, intelligence and communication were powerful tools in navigating encounters with civilizations far more advanced than themselves. Second, leadership, Preparation and teamwork could determine survival even in the face of overwhelming odds. Finally, courage and patience were essential qualities, allowing the crew to act decisively without provoking unnecessary conflict. For Mara, the experience was transformative. She understood that Veganine survival was not merely a matter of technology or strategy, but of human qualities that could not be replicated by machines alone. That as the alien fleet receded into the distance, Mara stood at the observation deck watching the stars and reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The silence of space, once comforting, now felt charged with potential. Veganine had survived the immediate crisis, but the universe remained full of mysteries, dangers, and opportunities. Mara felt a profound sense of accomplishment, tempered by the awareness that this was only the beginning of humanity's journey into the wider cosmos. The resolution was achieved, but the story was far from over. Vega 9 returned to its routines gradually, though the crew remained alert, aware that future encounters might require the same vigilance, intelligence, and courage that had saved them during the crisis. Every member of the crew had been tested and had risen to the occasion. Mara reflected on the delicate balance that had made the resolution possible. Knowledge combined with intuition, caution balanced by courage, and action guided by careful thought. It was a triumph not only of technology and skill, but of humanity's enduring spirit in the face of the unknown. The events on Vega 9 had left an indelible mark on every crew member, and in the days following the crisis, the station became a place of quiet reflection as well as ongoing vigilance. Mara Kessler, standing in the observation deck, watched the stars stretch across the endless void, each one a reminder of how vast and mysterious the universe truly was. The alien fleet had departed, leaving the outpost intact, but the magnitude of what had happened could not be measured in simple terms of damage avoided or lives saved. Every human on Vega 9 had confronted the unknown, faced forces beyond comprehension, and survived a trial that would define not only their own lives but the future of humanity's engagement with intelligent life beyond Earth. At first, the atmosphere aboard the station was tense but controlled. The crew went about repairing systems affected by the energy surges and gravitational fluctuations. Life support modules, communications arrays, and mining drones were recalibrated and tested to ensure full functionality. Every repair, however, carried with it a sense of reverence. The crew knew that their survival had not been guaranteed, and that even a minor error during the crisis could have led to catastrophe. Mara walked the corridors frequently, checking in with crew members, offering reassurance, and observing the subtle signs of psychological strain. Though outwardly composed, she herself wrestled with lingering thoughts of what might have gone wrong, knowing that the line between success and disaster had been razor-thin. The psychological aftermath of the encounter was significant. Crew members experienced a mixture of exhilaration, exhaustion, and lingering anxiety. Some could not sleep without reliving flashes of the fleet's immense ships, the pulsing energy patterns, and the sense of being watched by forces far beyond human comprehension. Liana Greer took an active role in providing counseling and structured support, guiding the crew through exercises designed to process trauma, maintain mental health, and reinforce trust among team members. Conversations that had previously revolved around mundane tasks now included reflections on the encounter, lessons learned, and the implications for humanity's understanding of the universe. The crew began to articulate a collective awareness that their experience was unique, historic, and transformative. Mara herself spent long hours documenting the events in meticulous detail. Every transmission, energy, pulse, anomaly, and reaction of the fleet was recorded, analyzed, and catalogued. She knew that this documentation could become the foundation for humanity's future interactions with intelligent extraterrestrial civilizations. Her logs included not only technical observations but also personal reflections, her fear, her strategy, and her interpretation of the alien intelligence's intentions. Mara wanted to ensure that future explorers would have the benefit of insight gained through experience, understanding that survival depended on both knowledge and human judgment. The incident also sparked profound philosophical reflection. The crew began to consider what the encounter revealed about humanity's place in the cosmos. For centuries, humans had speculated about intelligent life beyond their own planet, imagining distant civilizations with advanced technologies, diverse cultures, and perhaps motivations incomprehensible to human logic. Now, they had directly experienced one such civilization. The sheer scale, sophistication, and precision of the alien fleet forced them to confront the limits of human understanding. Mara found herself thinking not only about the danger they had faced but also about the responsibility humanity carried. If they were now aware of other intelligent life, they had a duty to approach the universe with respect, caution, and a willingness to learn. Interactions with the probe continued, though in a far less urgent and tense manner. It had become a trusted intermediary, providing signals that helped guide the crew in maintaining the station's systems and interpreting environmental anomalies. The crew had developed a routine of monitoring its transmissions, translating its energy patterns, and experimenting with responses. Even in this calmer phase, Mara recognized the need for patience and precision. The probe represented a bridge between humans and a civilization whose capabilities far exceeded their own, and the crew treated this opportunity with a sense of reverence. Every signal, every pulse, became a lesson in communication, observation, and understanding. The resolution of the crisis also prompted introspection about leadership, teamwork, and human resilience. Mara reflected on the moments when fear had threatened to paralyze them, and on the instances when courage, discipline, and cooperation had made the difference between survival and annihilation. She understood that leadership was not simply about issuing orders but about fostering trust, maintaining clarity, and balancing action with careful thought. The crew had demonstrated extraordinary adaptability under pressure, relying on their training, intelligence, and intuition. In the quiet aftermath, these qualities were celebrated, reinforced, and committed to memory for future challenges. Another significant aspect of reflection involved the relationship between humanity and technology. The encounter had highlighted both the potential and the limitations of human-designed systems. Veganines, drones, communication arrays, and life support modules had been critical in navigating the crisis, yet they had also been vulnerable to interference from forces beyond human understanding. Mara and Keon Riker engaged in long discussions about improving systems, incorporating adaptive technologies, and designing protocols capable of interacting with unknown intelligences safely. The lesson was clear: technological capability alone could not ensure survival. Success required human judgment, ethical consideration, and a willingness to adapt in real time. The alien encounter also prompted consideration of diplomacy and interstellar ethics. The fleet's behavior, though overwhelming, had demonstrated restraint and a willingness to interpret the humans' intentions. Mara recognized that humanity's future encounters with advanced civilizations would require more than technical knowledge. They would demand diplomacy, cultural sensitivity, and a capacity to communicate across profound differences in perception, motivation, and technology. The experience underscored the importance of patience, observation, and respect, reinforcing the idea that survival in the cosmos depended on humility as well as courage. As the days progressed, the crew began sharing their reflections more openly. Informal conversations replaced some routine tasks, with discussions about what they had witnessed, how it had affected them, and what it meant for the future. They debated theories about the fleet's civilization, the purpose of the probe, and the broader implications for humanity. These discussions, while speculative, were rooted in careful observation and practical experience. Mara encouraged them, understanding that processing the experience collectively would strengthen both morale and insight. The station had become not only the site of survival but a laboratory for understanding human responses to the extraordinary. The encounter also fostered a renewed appreciation for Earth and humanity's own fragility. The vast distances, the immensity of the fleet, and the ease with which Viganine could have been destroyed reinforced the notion that human civilization was small and vulnerable in the grand scope of the cosmos. Mara reflected on the responsibility that came with knowledge of other intelligent life. If humans were to continue exploring, communicating, and engaging with the universe, they would need to cultivate both wisdom and restraint. Survival was not merely about avoiding destruction, it was about understanding, cooperation, and preparation for the unforeseen. In addition to philosophical and operational reflection, practical steps were taken to ensure readiness for future encounters. The crew developed contingency plans for potential reappearance of the fleet, further anomalies in the asteroid field, or new probes. Communication protocols were refined, incorporating lessons learned from the crisis. Emergency response drills were instituted, emphasizing coordination and rapid problem-solving. Mara ensured that every member of the crew understood the importance of preparedness, recognizing that future challenges would require the same combination of intelligence, skill, and courage that had ensured their survival. The emotional landscape of the crew also evolved. Initial fear and anxiety gave way to cautious pride, tempered by humility. They had survived a confrontation with forces far beyond human comprehension, maintained composure under pressure, and established a foundation for communication and understanding. The shared experience created a bond among the crew members, strengthening their trust in one another and reinforcing the notion that human resilience was as critical as technological capability. Mara observed subtle shifts in behavior, more collaborative problem-solving, increased empathy during stressful tasks, and a shared sense of purpose. The ordeal had forged a team capable of extraordinary focus and mutual support. Mara also spent considerable time thinking about the implications of what they had learned. The fleet had demonstrated an ability to manipulate energy, mass, and gravitational forces on a scale humanity could not yet comprehend. They had interacted with Veganine systems, responding not with aggression but with adaptive intelligence. These observations offered insight into technological possibilities, communication strategies, and the nature of advanced intelligence. Mara knew that humanity had been given a rare glimpse into capabilities far beyond its current understanding, and that careful study could yield lessons for both science and philosophy. Despite the challenges, there was a sense of cautious optimism. The encounter had proven that reason, communication, and empathy could influence even a civilization of immense power. Humanity had survived, and more importantly, had established a foundation for understanding. The crisis had been a crucible, testing every skill, every judgment, and every human quality. The crew had emerged with both survival and knowledge, ready to apply lessons learned to future exploration and encounters. Mara felt a profound sense of achievement, tempered by awareness of the responsibilities that came with this new understanding. As weeks passed, Veganine returned to a semblance of routine. Though the experience had forever changed the station and its crew, mining operations resumed, system checks were conducted regularly, and scientific research continued with renewed intensity. Yet, the psychological and philosophical reflections persisted. Crew members continued to discuss the encounter, analyze signals, and theorize about the nature of the alien civilization. Mara encouraged these reflections, recognizing that the encounter was not only a historical event but also a transformative experience that would shape their approach to exploration, problem-solving, and leadership. The aftermath also brought a sense of connectivity to the universe. The crew recognized that humanity was not alone, that intelligent life existed beyond their planet, and that communication, understanding, and cooperation were possible. This realization inspired hope, curiosity, and a renewed sense of purpose. Mara saw in her crew a generation of humans prepared not only to survive but to engage thoughtfully with the unknown. They had faced the unimaginable, emerged alive, and gained knowledge that could guide humanity for decades, perhaps centuries to come. In reflection, Mara considered the broader meaning of the events on Veganine. Humanity had been tested at the edges of comprehension, forced to confront forces beyond imagination, and challenged to act with intelligence, courage, and restraint. They had succeeded not through brute strength or luck, but through collaboration, communication, and careful decision. The experience reinforced the idea that survival in the universe depended on human qualities as much as technology, patience, empathy, reasoning, and moral judgment. The lessons learned would echo far beyond the immediate crisis. As Mara gazed out at the distant stars, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for her crew, for the opportunity to witness the extraordinary, and for the resilience of humanity. The alien fleet had departed, leaving Veganine intact, and the probe had become a symbol of connection, understanding, and hope. The aftermath was a mixture of relief, pride, and anticipation for what might come next. Humanity had crossed a threshold, encountered intelligence beyond its own, and survived. The reflection phase was as much about understanding the experience as it was about planning for the future in the quiet of the observation deck. Mara finally allowed herself a moment of personal reflection. The fear, tension, and adrenaline of the breaking point had given way to clarity and perspective. She understood that this encounter had redefined the boundaries of human experience, expanding the crew's understanding of the universe and their place within it. Veganine had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and the human capacity to face the unknown with intelligence and heart. The aftermath was not merely about survival, it was about learning, growth, and the beginning of humanity's engagement with a larger, more complex universe than they had ever imagined.